They claim they was taken from West Africa. I don't know how this could be when in 1805, West Africa wasn't even populated. And we skip all over. They had the American Colonization Society, which was taking indigenous people from America to Liberia. They were taking them to Liberia. So when you hear a person ask the question, a Pan-African ask the question to say, well, how come y'all look more like the West Africans today more than y'all look like the Native Americans? Because we ain't the Native Americans, nigga. That's what we keep trying to tell y'all.
Let me specify before y'all go off. And all I would say is, okay, let's not say we don't know. If I don't know, I would say that you and your phenotype and every single one of the Aboriginals who have come on here look more like the West Africans today, the ones that are over there in Ghana today, than they do of the Native Americans who live on the reservations today.
It's because we ain't the Native Americans, nigga. That's what we keep trying to tell y'all. And they took us, we keep telling y'all they took us into Africa, not out of Africa.
See, they penciled us out. We got our asses whooped pen by pencil. Not physically in person, by pencil on paper. The triangle trade also tells you about North American slaves. Now, if you just said all of us are African, what is a North American slave? That's very distinguishable from an African slave and a North American slave. That's not something you're going to confuse. So in talking about that triangle trade, it leads you to ACS. ACS represents two things: the American Colonization Society and the African Colonization Society that they partnered with because of the Royal African Slavery Company that enslaved and transported more slaves than anybody. So in this story about this triangle trade that involves the transatlantic trade, they took North American slaves out of America and relocated them into places like Nova Scotia and London. If you took and placed North American slaves in West Africa to build up places like Sierra Leone and Liberia, there is a website called blackpast.org that is written and operated by Liberians. One of the passages on there tells you about how they brought North American slaves into West Africa and warred with the indigenous population. Now, when I first heard it and read it, I had to go back because something wasn't adding up. So we went from being African slaves to being North American slaves and warring with the indigenous population of West Africa. If you're warring with that indigenous population, you aren't a part of these people. These people aren't you. If they know that you are American, why you don't know you're American? Indian slavery was a real thing. You got the transatlantic slave trade, Indian slave trade, and much more going on within that. That's why it's called the triangular trade, because they didn't just trade people, they traded goods. Things taken from here and over there to be processed, wrapped, packaged, and sold from over there at a higher value, whereas it's free here. If you're gonna look up the transatlantic, look up the triangle trade. But if you really want to know how people got here, you need to look at the Pacific trade. They brought people in through the Pacific, not just the Atlantic. It's very difficult for people to make it through the Atlantic, even in present day. So if present day, the Atlantic Ocean is flipping over boats, what do you think happened back then? Go read about the triangle trade and then look up slavevoyages.com, because also within that, the steamboat didn't come out to the 1800s. Women could not make that voyage because of sanitation reasons. So the majority of people that were transported were men. So if you're telling me that you have a great-great-great-grandmother that was transported here in the 1600s, something's not right. There is a Mississippi in Africa. Mississippi is an Indian word. What is it doing in Africa? I had an African guy that heard me talking about that, thought I was wrong. So what I told him to do, if you want to prove me wrong, I would admit that I'm wrong if you can prove it. They've never done genealogy in Africa. That's not a thing. It's word of mouth. It's their oral story is what they do. Just like Indians, they tell orally what happened. So I encouraged him to look up his genealogy. Young man pulled his paperwork, realized that his grandmother was only there by way of ACS. He's American. He was like, well, it makes sense now. When you was mentioning Mississippi, he went and found Mississippi in Africa. He visited it. He said it's the style of the homes. I said they're called antebellum style homes that comes from the south of the United States. He said, and we used to eat these things that were rolled up. They were made of yellow corn flour. I mean, the man described the hush puppy and didn't know what it was. He had been eating it his whole life. Mississippi in Africa is a real thing. That is an Indian word. So what is it doing in Africa? Are you saying those are Indians? Because where we go is where we take our stuff to. This baby over here eating a hush puppy and don't know what it is. So some of y'all Africans aren't Africans. Y'all are displaced Indians.